and it's 10 on the dot. So allow us just to give a few moments for some other colleagues of ours to join. And then let's agree to start maybe in the next 5 to 10 minutes. But in the meantime, you're warmly welcome. You can use the chat room to introduce yourself and your respective organizations.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, our development partners. Gifts, if you could take us through the program, then we will start our meeting.
Good morning, sir. Mr. Frank is going to take us through the program, and we'll just share it.
Is Frank on the call?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Morning,
So
morning, Frank.
Yeah, we had agreed to start 10 minutes after 10, so it's exactly 10. So let me take the opportunity to once again welcome everyone to our training today on production capacity data collection. This training is actually aimed to enhance the capacity of our members, especially business membership organizations, to collect data which will be useful for making evidence-based advocacy. It's a very short training of 2 hours, starting from 10 to 12. And the aim is just to introduce you to some basic tools and the best way to collect data and to use it for your advocacy. So in this training, we'll be with Professor Avias, who is under the program of ICR facility, which is also funded by EU. And according to our program, which has been projected by GIFT, we are going to start with some few opening remarks. Then we'll have a photo session, and then we'll go straight to the presentation and some few questions. So we have different sessions that will be going on, and hopefully you take advantage of this opportunity to ask as many questions as possible. And going forward, I believe this could be a start of something which can be continuous to build the capacity on this area of data, because it's very important for us. So with that brief introduction, let me take the opportunity to welcome our CEO, Mr. John Bosco Kalisa, to make his brief remarks.
Thank you very much, our moderator, Frank Adafa. Good morning, all our participants who are here, and allow me, first of all, before you deliver the opening remarks, to appreciate my good friend Stefan, and also the consultant Govu. But and also appreciate ICR facility, European Union, GFA, and the business community, especially our national focal points present, and all the participants across the region. This is a very, very important training where we will be looking at the methodology on collecting production capacity data. Indeed, at the EABC, we are very excited to be partnering with the ICR facility and also the support from the European Union in terms of coming up with this important tool. Allow me to thank all participants for finding time amidst your busy schedule to participate in this training on production capacity data collection. Your participation and the active engagement demonstrates your commitment in enhancing evidence-based advocacy to boost our intra-EAC trade and to foster a better integration agenda. Again, allow me, participants who are here, including our staff from EABC, to take this opportunity to applaud the support from Investment Climate Facility Reform Program, and also participate GFA for organizing this capacity building training for private sector players in enhancing the capacity on the application of data collection tools for reliable information and the data that can be used for regional policy reforms. Indeed, their support is very instrumental in today's capacity building training. So in promoting a sustainable environment for the private sector and spearheading policy reform, data is very useful for informing the decision makers and other players in terms of allocation, in terms of allocating scarce resources and accelerating the development we want. So lack of research and evidence-based data is one of the factors that are hindering or preventing business associations and the chambers from engaging in effective business advocacy. So lack of appropriate data can lead to suboptimal policy decision and generally slows down decision-making process at the country level as well as the EAC level. Ladies and gentlemen, reliable data is a key component of the system's advocacy. So utilizing data will help advocacy bodies to present a strong argument for systems change. The use of data allows advocacy body to demonstrate why changes are needed. So through analyzing research data allows the policy bodies, the policy advocacy bodies, to move effectively in determining the route of intra-EAC trade impediments and be able to formulate a robust strategy to enhance cross-border trade to foster the regional integration. So with this, data application will help to explain both the goods we are able to produce, especially those that we have the comparative and competitive advantage. And I'm very confident that the team, especially our consultant, will do a good work in terms of enhancing this knowledge, in terms of data collection. So as I conclude, allow me to again appreciate the supporters and also appreciate our business membership organization who are present and who will use these tools in terms of serving their members very well, very appropriate. So the evidence-based advocacy will enable our BMOs in terms of collecting relevant data that will also help our policymaker in decision making. So the regional BMOs, of course, their main activity is policy advocacy, and to do that, you need to have a granular data. So with that, allow me to thank everyone, and again, I thank our sponsors for organizing this wonderful training. Thank you, and I wish you a fruitful training and a deliberation. Asanteni sana, and have a productive training.
Thank you, Edie. So before I take the opportunity to welcome Mr. Stefan, let me just remind everyone of the rules of this particular webinar. So you make sure that you keep your microphones off and your videos. Also make use of the hand raise button to raise any issue in case you have a question, but also you can use our chats to write your question and any other concern that you might have. So with that, let me welcome Mr. Stefan. Please give your remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for welcoming me. I will also just share slides. I know we haven't discussed that before, but I hope that's fine. So welcome everyone. I'm Stefan Felix. I'm with the Investment Climate Reform Facility, which is supporting the EABC at the moment in setting up this training, and has been supporting over the last few months in the area of collecting production data for the reason that the CEO just mentioned already. Just a couple of words about what we do, because I think just looking at the list of the people here, that's why I thought I'd do share quickly some of the slides, because I do think it might be relevant for some of you. We are funded by the EU, the OACPS, the Organization for African, Caribbean, Pacific States, and the German government and British Council, and being implemented by 4 European organizations, of which GIZ is one of them, and I'm with GIZ implementing the ICR facility. And what we do, and that I do think it just makes sense just for 2 minutes just to talk about it, because it might be relevant for your work. We provide on-demand technical assistance up to sort of 90 expert days. Can be done over 6 months, 12 months, but it can't be more than 90 expert days, to help a potential a public sector organization, ministry, department, but also private sector associations such as the EABC and such as a lot of the people who are joining this call today, so to help those entities address a specific business climate issue that they seek to address, for example, to make it easier register a business or make it easier for women to access finance, or to collect certain data for public-private dialogue purposes, or engage with the government on a particular issue through a public-private dialogue. So that's the sort of thing we can provide. We are active in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. So I think that basically covers all of the EAC countries. We have a very strong focus now, more than before, on women's economic empowerment. So anything we do would have to be related to women's economic empowerment. These are some of the examples that we work on: investment policies. Sorry, I just muted the other colleague. Investment policy, industrial policies, public-private dialogue processes. Those are some of the things we work on here. A couple of examples. So, for example, we're currently working with the Ministry of Industry in Eswatini and the Seychelles on a new gender-sensitive industrial policy. We're working with, or we have worked with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, not sure whether they're here today, on a policy paper to support the capabilities to advocate for women to benefit from the African Continental Free Trade Area. We're also currently working with the Employers Confederation of Zimbabwe to address gender-based violence at the workplace by looking at what are relevant national and international policies that could be emulated. So these are some examples. If this is of interest to you, go to our website. I'll post it in the chat, icr-facility.eu, and you can have a look. And if this is relevant to you, you can submit a request, and then we'll look at the request and engage with you. But anyway, this call today, this training today, is the first of two trainings, so 2 hours now, and then another 2 hours maybe in a month's time. We'll inform you beforehand. Today is more on collecting data for public-private dialogue purposes, and the second session will be more around how to engage in constructive public-private dialogue, in particular with the women's economic empowerment lens on it. And with that, I wish you a very good training. Avius, our consultant, I'm sure will do a fantastic job, as he has done over the last few months already, supporting EABC in this endeavor. And with that, I'll hand back to Frank, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you for that wonderful presentation. Hopefully, we will also share it with our participants so that they can know more about the ICR facility. So without any further ado, let me take the opportunity to welcome our Professor Avius for the first session of the presentation, which I believe Gift has to share the screen, or its professor, on introducing the training, but also on collecting data for policy advocacy. So you're welcome, Professor.
Okay, so Avius, my name is Avius Jovu. It's dark here. I'm in Vanuatu, somewhere in the Pacific. Not professor, but I know where you're coming from. Just a doctor, something like that. I don't know, can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. So for purposes of presentation, I think I will dim my my video cam so that I think the bandwidth, at least coming from so far away, maybe is much better. So we'll pause that, and let me share what I have here, if you allow. Sorry. Okay. Loading. Just a sec. Oh. Let me see if I'm able to share the file. Just hold on. Chrome tab. Let me share that. Are you able to see my screen now?
We
Yes,
can,
we
but
see a screen, but it doesn't bring any presentation.
All right. Stop sharing. Let's start again. Sorry about that. All right.
yeah, maybe if yes, in the meantime, you can also share the presentation with us, and if we'll be able to project it for you, it will also be
Yes,
easy.
let me do that one. Yeah, one sec. Yeah,
We
let
can
me
see
stop
it now.
sharing.
We can
Sorry
see it
about
now.
this.
We can see the presentation now.
You can see it? All right. Okay. Wow.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Tell me if you can see the full screen now.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, technology. Right. So data collection on production capacity. The contents of our meeting, or workshop, or training. Looking at the objectives of this training, which the ED, I think, touched on, the expected outcomes, and then the issues covered. So we'll be looking at, how to plan for data collection. I can see from, the listing or the introductions that people did, some of you are already well versed into in these issues, but I think there are others that maybe might find also a few things also relevant. The methodology, then how to prepare or construct data collection instruments, and then looking at an example of sugar production capacity. The reason why this intervention ICR came into being in this activity with the EABC. Objective, it has been mentioned that at least we enhance the capacity of the EABC and member associations to collect data on production capacity. At a later stage, I think not in this training, but another training, maybe you want to look at data analysis using different techniques. Outcomes, at least the ability to plan. And that, I think, is quite a big issue, because before you go out in the field out there, you need to have done a good homework, prepare. And in a moment, I will show you a number of issues or maybe checklists that you need to make sure is in place and you are well versed and it is the issues are well addressed. Then, of course, hopefully, we enhance your capacity to undertake simple to intermediate, maybe basic level of data collection. This is just a 2-hour session or training. We spend a lot of time in, colleges, really maybe a whole semester or so on research methods, etc. So I'm aware of that 2 hours will do nothing to it. But for some, of course, maybe. Hello? Oh.
Yes, you can continue.
All right. Okay, thank you. Okay, so objective, why we're here. So there is this issue on sugar production capacity. There's a whole story here, but I'll just put it in my own words in a very simple terms. That say between you and me, we have an agreement, a trade agreement, a customs union. And the rules, of course, are that what I supply to you as exports, they come into your country duty-free. The common external tariff, we're all aware of this, equal to 0. We agree. And then when you also export to me, I will also charge 0 duty, nothing. Okay, all set. On the condition that what you bring to me is produced by your manufacturers or producers or your people, whoever. We need to have proof on that, that you have indeed produced these things, rules of origin issues. Okay. Otherwise, of course, if we don't have that condition, you might as well be importing from wherever and claiming that it is your own and then shipping them over to me. It benefits your importers in your country, but then it damages my domestic industries, those who are able who want to compete. So you have this kind of issue in the ESC on a number of products that countries are doubting each other, whether indeed the commodities that they're supplying across the border to originate from that exporting country. So the case of sugar and other. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we can still only see the cover slide.
Oh, really?
So, yes. I think you need to go to the right slide for everyone.
Oh boy, sorry.
Yes, now we can see slide 2.
Are you there?
Yes, slide 2
So,
now.
okay. All right. Okay. I think then I'll use that mode. Okay. So yeah, I think I explained the objectives and also the learning outcomes, and I was in the process of explaining why the ICR got involved, why the EABC sought assistance or support from the EABC sought assistance from ICR, that there are these issues between EAC partner states that have doubts over things like, country one exporting sugar to another country, and then the other country, the importing country, thinking or believing that you are not able to export so much into us because you don't have the capacity to produce that. In a nutshell, that is putting it differently. All right. So they're doubting that you are following the rules of origin. They're doubting that you can produce so much sugar. Now, it's not just sugar. There are other products that I'll mention in a moment. Okay. The other reason, of course, is that given, the state of, a play that sometimes you don't have enough data. Okay. So you have common external tariffs, EABC believes, that sometimes are set without a proper basis or maybe not supported by evidence. Okay. You want to set high tariffs for a reason like protecting domestic industries because you have some production there, right? I think I've done, sorry about this. Are you still able to see my slides?
No.
Professor, your slide has disappeared.
Okay, so let me do this for a second, if you bear with me, Frank, and I will just forward to you my slides, and then you can play them as I read them through. Okay, 1 sec. Sorry about this. Okay, I've sent them over the slides over. Then if you can project them.
Okay. So Gift, if you manage to refresh your emails faster than me, please share the presentation because I'm also trying to refresh.
Okay.
That's noted.
Oh, Stephanie, I also copied you in, but then of course you're not going to be here through for the whole duration. So.
Maybe just continue verbally, and then in the meantime, Gift and Frank can hopefully upload it.
Okay. Yeah, Frank is uploading something. So you got it, Frank, all right? Yeah. So I was on slide number 5. Okay. Yeah, so I was just explaining that the second reason, apart from the partner states doubting each other, whether they have production capacity on sugar, there's also the concern that EABC has, which is that sometimes there is insufficient data on production capacity to inform the right policy positions, for example, on setting tariffs or external tariffs. Okay, I mean, how do you justify blocking? By that I mean highly protecting a sector or an industry if you don't have enough domestic production. Of course, there are other reasons for political purposes, maybe a small production somewhere but supports highly politically sensitive maybe sector or areas, whatever. But at least it could be, there is a reason why maybe you would say, okay, let's have some data. Okay, that justifies how we set our tariffs. So protecting sectors where there is domestic, you want to make sure that they are open to allow for a trade to take place. Now, that aside, coming to the real issues, okay? Slide number 6, collecting data for policy advocacy, the issues to consider, okay? Number 1 is to define or identify the problem, the issue for which you want to collect data, okay? In academic, we've seen it. Sometimes you have students that are maybe writing research proposals or coming up with an idea. And then you say, okay, this is what I do. Yes. Can you tell us how relevant it is? At the end of the day, you've done all the work. Who is going to read this? For what use? The same thing goes for you or here. If you're saying this is for policy advocacy, then obviously the data that you're going to collect must have some relevance for policy. Okay, so knowing the specific issue and then also presenting the policy relevance Is it at industry level, sector, country, or regional level? Okay. Then you also want to think aloud about the value addition. I'll come to this point of value addition, I think, in several places in this presentation. And then the issue of time relevance. Should it be now or later? But sometimes it's an urgent issue. You want to do data collection straight away. But should you go out there, or maybe you can find the same data from other sources? Of course, how reliable are those other sources? The other thing is, are those other sources willing to share information? Yes or no? And then the cost benefit consideration. The benefit, given the cost outlay that you're going to put in place in order to obtain that data. Okay, so define the problem, but also put it in the context, put it, tie it to policy. And then understand the policy, the specific policy. What is the stated government policy? What is the stated regional policy? You have the EAC Treaty, for example, Customs Union Protocol, Trade Protocol. I put it to you that if you're not familiar with the treaty, the protocol on Customs Union, Trade Protocol, then the question is, how do you go out to the partner states to advocate a policy on issues or matters that relate to these issues? The treaty, the protocol. Okay. So if you're going to collect data on production capacity because of issues like rules of origin are not being, or they are being abused, etc., and then you don't understand the mechanics, how things work, okay, you have a problem. All right. So then you also need to look at the purpose, the objectives, how it is implemented, and what are the expected outputs. Okay. Once you understand these things, then at least you can see somewhere the openings, the opportunities, the issues that you should focus on. And obviously, you have policy positions that and the parameters that will guide you to say, okay, the policy says A, B, C, D. And we are finding data that says you guys, or you people, or, the secretariat, or maybe the regional the partner states are not active, or you are misrepresenting, or you are whatever. The point is that whatever you do must be guided by the policy. As we say there's no time or money to waste on unguided issues. Of course, data collection. The other point then is having read the policy, familiarize yourself or get to know the policy instruments used. What are the policy instruments? The policy document out there, will have everything in it unless it is not properly done. It will spell out the instruments, the measures. I don't know how many of us have seen an example, trade policy reviews by the World Trade Organization, or the trade policy. I mean, when they do the trade policy review, they will say policy A, the measures, the instruments, the measures, etc. Okay. So for you, that is really another rich area to find out. I'm getting the pings here. I don't know whether, am I still being heard or am I alone in the world?
We can hear you.
We can hear you very well.
Fine.
We can hear you very well.
Thank you. Okay, so maybe it's people joining in. Thank you. All right. So those issues or the instruments and measures provide us with an opportunity to know what variables to go out there and collect. Okay. The next point is what data and information are needed to review and evaluate policy or address the issue at hand. Obviously, if you're going to answer that, if you're going to advocate, you're going to advocate something to people, the policymakers. You cannot go to them if you're not fully versed in the policy itself. So we're just like repeating the point, but at least trying to put it to you that when you say you want to do policy advocacy, collect data for policy advocacy, first, be like them. Okay, but of course you can't be like them completely. So you should understand how the policy works, how it can be assessed. That could be maybe as provided in the policy framework itself, but also from research or existing empirical works. Okay. And the next thing is, obviously, you can't just have a big, broad-based kind of data collection exercise. You need to keep it narrow and focused. Remember, we said, what is the specific issue? And that's very important. Okay. The next point is on the desired outcome. All right, or position, the issue at hand. So one thing that it's very tempting sometimes is to massage, sure that it gives you the desired outcome, and then you can go to policymakers and say, hey, look at this. It says you're not up to it or otherwise. Okay. Now, maybe you can succeed for a while, but you'll be found out. Because obviously, when they receive your position, they go back and do research. They refer to the data. They'll ask you sometimes, where did you get the data from, et cetera, et cetera. How do you get it? All right. So that's what the advice is. Don't fake data. No data massaging. You know, there used to be the doing a business, you know, by the World Bank. And I hope everybody knows that it got discontinued for a very simple reason, that some big country was influencing data massaging. All right. So that then at the end of the day, the country looks like it has got a very, you know, put it like excellent business environment. All right. And then they got found out. Obviously, that got discontinued. I mean, the World Bank was shamed in that. All right. Anyway, but I said, but I'm just telling you that you would rather really let the data speak. The facts will always prevail. Okay. So you're still planning to collect data. Before you even ask for support, ICR or whatever, look around. Who else is already doing that, collecting that particular data, or reviewing or evaluating the policy issue at hand? Obviously, you want value addition. You want to avoid resource waste. So in this particular case, production capacity, ESC partner states, they do have these issues from time to time, and they conduct what they call on-the-spot investigations or verification missions on production capacity. So they bring together customs officers from various parties or maybe partner states, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi. All right. They go to Tanzania or whichever other country of interest. And then they look at the production process, the capacity and everything, and report back. And then they have to sign up, you know, the report. But sometimes they don't. Even if everybody was there, they saw everything, recorded, whatever, everybody's like, okay, yeah, I mean, those people who go out in the field. When it comes back to government level, sometimes they don't, for various reasons. We're not going in there. Now, EABC, this is what I say, they need to justify why they should collect the same data, policy advocacy. So now, you ask the question, yes, they go out and do the on-the-spot investigations, verifications, and this is now to back or to support EABC. The issue is that whatever investigations they do out there, the verification missions, they don't make that information public. So if it is not available public, how does somebody like EABC go about advocating policy change or something like that? So in a way, you can say EABC is justified because they don't have access to that data. But on other things, really, if others are already collecting that data, then surely you need to pay attention to that and use the information. Okay. And that's the next point that says what evidence has been unearthed, collected already. Do a thorough literature review. You can't think of, do policy advocacy if you haven't done literature review. Okay, literature review, you look at so many questions. Okay, who else addressed the same issue or similar problem? What specific questions did they ask? What were they investigating? And their findings. What methodologies? So that your work really is seen to be adding value. I mean, it could be that the data is not there, so obviously you're adding value in that sense. But what we're trying to say here is, don't just jump in before you look around. What else is being done? By who? Because you might learn a few things from there, but at the same time, you might also find that, I mean, a few things in terms of methodology, but at the same time, you might find that actually you can go to International Sugar Organization, for example. But do they have information on sugar production capacity? They have information, data on sugar production, outputs, consumption, capacity. You go to statistical offices, Bureau of Statistics in other countries. Do they have information on production capacity? EABC found out that no, but they have information on production. Now, there's a difference between production capacity and production. Okay, we'll come to that in the questionnaire. Okay, the next point is explore opportunities.
Obvious. On that, let me interject on that point on data, the data sources. And you made a very important point in terms of avoid resource waste. We've been struggling with credible sources of data at the EAC. And in most cases, we rely on an international data source like TradeMap, UNCTAD. So where do we get the real-time data? Which institution? Because sometimes that's the biggest challenge we have.
Yeah, so where to get real-time data? I cannot give you the names of places or institutions where, because the thing is, if there is an institution that gathers that data, then yes, we can say, okay, there is this institution. But in the case of production capacity, for example, it would appear that there isn't. Not even the statistical offices, Bureau or national, collect that data. And obviously the international organizations rely on national sources of data. Sometimes, of course, they conduct their own surveys, etc. Right? That's when now you come in as an interested party, like in this case, for purposes of policy advocacy, to do the collection. But right now, I cannot say, go to this organization or that organization on real-time data. But I think then the issue is on production capacity, because the question of sustainability, thank you for raising that question. The question of sustainability, for how long, looking into the future, will the EABC be going about collecting data on production capacity? I mean, we can train everybody, but that's very expensive. So then the issue then is to sit down with the statistical offices, Bureau of Statistics, or other major research or data collecting agencies to say, hey, when you do your surveys on A, B, C, D, please also include a question or questions on production capacity. Okay, you can rely on the data from the Bureau of Statistics. They are well versed into the methodologies on how to collect data. So thank you very much for that question. I think we've just made a comment on something that I think on the way forward to address this issue, because indeed the question of sustainability is a big one. All right. your associations, even EABC, you can't do this forever and ever. Maybe, we don't know. Okay. Next is on what evidence has been unearthed or collected already. I think I mentioned that one. Okay. Then the H part is on collaborating, linking up with like-minded researchers or stakeholders for very simple reasons, very obvious. You share and gain knowledge, techniques, or references or recommendations, insights, etc. You also have access to a larger database. As we know, sometimes they ask for fees. International Sugar Organization, they ask for fees in excess of, is it 200 pounds, British pounds, etc. Okay, but maybe it's a fee worth paying to get the data that you need. Okay. Slide 9. Who are the key and information data providers? Okay. Who provides the data? So, well, you say first, in this case, the producers, the owners, companies owning sugar production. But then it could be others, maybe, farmers, households, depending on the question at hand. It could be institutions collecting and disseminating data, statistical offices, or maybe research organizations. I think there is somebody from KEPSA, something like that. There are lots of other research institutions anywhere around. Think tanks, they do collect data. Sometimes they're also out there advocating for policy change on poverty and other things. But it could also be maybe on production. I'm not so sure on that one. But generally, you need to go out there. And then international data repositories, various, WTO, FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, World Bank, IMF, International Sugar Organization, UNCTAD, etc. All right. So when you're planning for this work, data collection, you need to look at, okay, is this data available here, there? The ED just asked, where do we go? The question is, maybe some of these, but do they have ready available data? From the look of things, no. In that case, then that's when now you say, okay, let's move on to the next stage. How often are we going to collect this data? And that's the issue of sustainability as well, we just touched on. Production capacity, it changes over time. You have investments added, de-investments, companies closing down for various reasons. So data collection capacity, production capacity collected in 2022, all right, is not going to be representative in maybe 10 years time. Of course, things may not change, but you're not so sure. And that's why in the sugar production questionnaire, production capacity questionnaire, there is a question, a set of questions we're asking. What was your production capacity 2 years ago, 3 years ago? What are the plans for the next 3-5 years to come? Okay. And then the cost. At what cost? Okay. So there are so many ways that you can price the activities that you need to undertake in order to collect the data. On the next slide or slides, it's just a simple example of how to prepare a budget. Okay. Slide number 10. So part A is just a breakdown. Okay. You need to pay people a bit of wages, and then the field expenses, and then miscellaneous expenses. Sometimes you have to apply somewhere to get the authorization to conduct the data collection. And obviously, maybe VAT has to be paid and other charges. And if you look at the breakdown, then you can call them key experts, support staff, team leader. It could be 5 principal researchers. In medical, is it medical studies, whatever? Sometimes you have 10, 8, all of them, put them there. So if it was EABC, maybe it would be team leader, somebody external, internal, and then desk officers, maybe 5 countries. All right. And support staff, drivers included. So this is something that I did with a colleague anyway. We applied for, well, we submitted a bid to do research. Okay. Obviously, they looked at everything that we provided. All right. Field expenses, subsistence allowances. All right. And then transportation. And then you have miscellaneous. Nowadays, you use tablets to collect data. Communication. I don't know whether I included a data manager there. Somebody could be one of the, is not there, but definitely you have to include data manager if you're employing somebody from outside. Stationery, refreshments, and all those things. Okay. So this is part of the planning process. All right. Planning to do data collection. You have the policy side of things, so many questions. You satisfy yourself that it is relevant. You satisfy yourself that nobody has done it before, or that there is this data. We go collect it ourselves, or it is already collected. Sometimes you have access fees or otherwise. Okay. The next part is on methodology. I don't know if at this point then we are ready for a break before we come to the methodology issues. Mr. Daffa.
Yes, Professor, thank you. Let me take the opportunity to open the room for any questions. As you might have been listening, the professor presented on issues to consider while collecting data, but also on the planning side of budgeting, the amount of inputs that will be required to go into that particular exercise and how much each will cost. And maybe someone has a question on this before we can go ahead to the other session. So we open the floor for questions.
There is someone called Juma, Professor. Juma has raised the hand.
Okay.
Yes, Juma, you are welcome. Karibu.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity, and thanks, Prof, for that profound presentation. I would just want you to also, as we come back after, or maybe now, just comment, because I sense that there is some sort of complexity in data for some products, I'll give an example just to ensure that the question is clear. I'm an importer, for instance, who is from Kenya, and my business is to sell water, bottled water. But my capacity only allows me to produce or to purify the water, but my bottles are imported from elsewhere. Or better still, I am in the business of producing sausages. So I get my meat internally, and then I import the digestible plastic that is used to package my meat for the sausages. So then, as I collect data, or as I produce data as a producer, and with now the RROs, the rules of origins in place, my data because my production gives my output in units. So let's say I produce 300,000 units of the sausage. but in my unit, there is a product that I didn't produce internally. I only got my meat and processed, but there's some element of that product which is from elsewhere. So then how do we account for that even as we collect data or as we give data? Because this data is important in regional trade, so that as we apply the rules of origins, products may have elements of the product which come from other places which are not in the rules of origin, or which are not favored by the rules of origin. And then also I would want you to comment on the element of data decay, because some data points or some elements of data really decay very fast or become obsolete very quickly. In the sense that some of those data are updated on a daily basis or on a monthly basis, for instance. So if I'm doing a research that takes, for instance, a year or 2 years to conclude, then how do I ensure that my research takes account of the element that data could become obsolete as quickly as in a week's time, or in a month's time? And even as I make reference to data that is already existing, how is data decay accounted for, so that I don't make reference to data that is obsolete or has decayed? Thanks, and I submit. Thanks.
Okay. I think let me respond to this before the questions become like pile up and then I forget. So yeah, the question on the fact that, and which is obvious anyway, that you're producing something or somebody's producing something that has both imported and domestically sourced inputs. So how do you collect data on production capacity in that case? Okay. Now that is a question, I think, that obviously the partner states, when they do the verification missions, all right, they always look into. They go out there and assess the production process, the level of inputs or contributions to inputs versus those that are coming from within the ESC region. Now, in the rules of origin, you have what I call the general rules of origin and then product specific rules of origin. Okay. For product specific rules of origin, they specifically state the proportions, sometimes the percentages or the processes that must be done within the country for the output to qualify as originating. Okay. So if you're faced with that situation, say, okay, how do I collect data on this? Obviously, you need to, as we will show in the sugar production capacity questionnaire, you need to show the data, collect data on how much is imported, how much is originating from within the ESC partner state or within the region, because rules of origin at the customs union level allow you to source materials from other ESC partner states, accumulation, as it is called. Okay, so the answer is in your left hand to have the rules of origin for that specific product and read what they say. If they say, for example, imported inputs must account for 10%, all right, and you are using more than 10%, then obviously you have issues. Because, as we said earlier, understand the policy position, understand the measures, the instruments. How are they? I mean, how it works. Okay. So once you understand that, and then you come back to the situation we have at hand here, you know exactly what data to collect. Because policy says it shall be 10% or 15%. So collect data on the inputs and do the calculations. What percentage am I using? A percentage of inputs am I using in this production? I guess I'm answering that question. You collect data on both the imports, imported inputs, those that are coming from your country, those that are coming from within the region. Those that are coming from your country and region, obviously, they are like domestic because it's customs union. You also ask about
maybe on that one, if I may intervene, Professor. And you are very right. You are very right, and also the participants is very right in terms of that accumulation. I think there is a formula. There is a formula that is agreed in terms of accumulation, especially for the product specific. I think at the ESC level, I think for the manufactured or those goods that have gone through substantial transformation, the local content should not be less than 60% of the value of that product. And I guess from the example of sausage, what you are importing is not beef. What you are importing is the packaging material, and you yourself you know the value of the packaging material to sell that sausage. So I think usually there is a formula that is shared, and I think that's what we need to do as the ABC, because last week we had a very detailed discussion on rules of origin, and even what is allowed under accumulation, because as we go to the CFTA, we are told that you are not even allowed to do accumulation for imported products from outside the bloc. So if you import packaging material maybe from EAC partner states, then your product is qualified and it doesn't need to be subjected to a lot of rigorous customs requirement. So I think those are things that we need to dive deeper, and also share with you the formula that is being required at the ESC level, even at the continental level, because this is very, very, very important. Continue, Professor. I wanted just to add to that.
Thank you very much. And that's the beauty of having you in here, because then we can help one another. I mean, it's sharing knowledge anyway. And this is what I think you're already doing. So then the other question was on data decay, how to account for data decay, or how to ensure that you have the right data. I think this is maybe a point, I think quite a point that the ED also mentioned or asked earlier, real-time data. Okay. If you need or you want real-time data, then obviously that means your budget. You must have a budget to do it. Because if there's no alternative source of information, of data, what else do you do to get that information? You must engage in data collection. There is a point on frequency. I think that I mentioned earlier. How often do you need to collect the data? Okay, your data requirements are such that you need to do it every quarter. That's very expensive. And obviously you must factor that into your cost outlays. Or maybe every 2 years. It depends. It's a real situation. I mean, think of maybe a completely different example, laptops, all right? Every 2 to 3 years, I mean, we could still use laptops that are 5 years old, but the technology has moved on. So maybe in your production, activities, you also have these issues, whether it is technology, whether it is something else that has changed. That means you have to keep up. And that means to keep up, means you have to continuously budget for data collection, that kind of thing. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Professor, thank you. Thank you for that. And I think you should continue with the next session.
Okay. Right. So the next one is on methodology issues. Okay. So as we mentioned earlier, that this is a relatively short training session. What we'll do here is to introduce When, of course, we started with this activity, well, some of the things that you have here are general. They're not exactly referring to sugar production capacity, but when it was said, okay, maybe we bring in associations, etc., that's why I kind of like broaden the scope. But at the same time, we don't want to give you the impression that this is all it is or there is about it, the methodologies. Okay, so this is like an appetizer to get you started. There are references I think now you can find online, but also you can find in textbooks, etc. We would always want to encourage you to do that. Okay. Now, what type of data? You want to have a bit of data information. Obviously, production capacity is quantitative, but not always. Sometimes, as policy advocate, sometimes you need to look at other types of information, qualitative. Quantitative, basically numbers. Okay, how many, how much, how often, those kind of numerical data. Qualitative, you ask somebody to explain how they feel or why things went wrong, what happened, etc. In focus group discussions, you sit down around and then have a discussion. You collect qualitative information, textual. Of course, you can tabulate or tally certain maybe issues that they raise in those discussions. Okay, so you either have quantitative or qualitative. And nature of data, well, primary or secondary. Secondary is information data that is already there. You go to the Bureau of Statistics, National Statistics offices, they collect data. The data is already there. Think tanks, or it can be EABC. They have some data on something. The data is already there. That's secondary. Otherwise, primary. Primary. And that's now becomes a bit tricky because then you have to think, plan how to go about collecting primary data. Like in this case, production capacity is primary data. Nobody seems to be collecting that data. That EABC is aware of, that we are aware of. If we were aware of this particular data, well, of course, I said verification missions, they don't share the information, forcing EABC to go primary data collection. Okay. When you look at, when you consider primary, then of course, there are a number of issues that you want to consider. The best scenario or situation is, of course, if we knew about everybody or every individual or every activity, population. But do we have a budget for that? No, limited resources. And that forces you to work with a subset. In the case of sugar producers in East Africa, the numbers are not that very large. But of course, ICR, quite generous. They were able to say, we are going to accommodate all sugar producers. In that case, then the issues of sampling, etc., just disappear. Okay? The idea of choosing a subset, not the whole, but just a small portion of it. But if you're going to do a portion of that, then there are things that you should observe. Large enough to allow detection of true picture of the situation. We're always concerned with the true situation. If we're going to have a fraction of you, you must be representative of the real thing, of the whole population. Now, if that is the case, then you have the problem. How many? How much? What size of the population that you want to work with? Now, there are so many formulas I think that you can find in text. Also, nowadays, you can find online. There is this example that I have here, a website with a calculator. It asks you to just type in numbers, confidence level, margin of error, how far you want to go, the population proportion, and how many. So if you put in 60, as I did here, what does it say? Sample size must be 53. I'll come to these question marks in a moment. It says that means 53 or more measurements are needed to have a confidence level of 95%. On 14, slide 14, you see on slide 13, you have question marks against the confidence level, etc. If you just highlight that, then you get the information that is there on slide 14. Confidence level, margin of error. I've kind of like simplified, in the green areas there. To say confidence level of 90% is to say 95% chance that the true value of the thing you are measuring, 95%. So now you think, why 95%? Why 50%? Why not 50%? Okay. Now, if you went out there, collected data on the basis of 50-50, whether it is in or out, you take it to policymakers and they ask you, oh, you got this data, all these numbers. Oh, show us, how did you get the data? Oh, we said 50-50, meaning there is a 50% chance what you're telling us is not true. Yeah, 50-50. Please, as they say, give us a break. I mean, the probability.
Okay,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that means the likelihood of you being wrong is just so huge. Although 50-50, sometimes, when you're in a school, sometimes students celebrate when they have got 50%, the passing mark. No, not here. It has to be close to 100%. If it is 100%, then obviously you're looking at the whole thing, isn't it, the real thing? But as we said, you can't work with the whole thing. You must work with a subset. So to have something like 95% or even 99% chance that the data that you found an estimate production capacity equals, let's say, 10,000, you have that level of confidence, 99%. Surely, you are telling us, or what you're telling us is very close to the true thing. And then the converse of it is like saying, oh, there is a 5% chance that it is outside. Now that's quite small. We can work with that. And we think that it's unlikely. 1% chance, it's unlikely. People will be comfortable with that. All right. I've given you an example there. It says hectarage. You go out there and measure, say, okay, maybe plus or minus a little bit of this. What do you mean? You're saying you could be wrong by that much. But in relative terms, you're saying 2%. And that's yeah. I mean, you can't be accurate, perfect. Of course, if you take 100% population, everything, no question of that. But if you're going for a subset, you could be wrong. Chances are that you'll be wrong. So you try to minimize that. All right. The next one is population. So I've given you these examples because the formula that we saw there asks for those things. You plug in those numbers, then you find that it gives you different sample sizes that you need to go out there and collect. Okay. So you know the number. How do you go about collecting or identifying who you should? I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to investigate 53, or it could be 200, whatever. Think of agricultural production, all right? Milk producers, or maybe producers of a certain product or commodity, thousands of them. And then you've decided, okay, we're going to cover 5,000. Then the question is, how do you identify the 5,000 out of 50,000? All right. Statisticians and others have said, okay, try this method. Random sampling. Lottery, raffle draws, everybody in there, with your name. If you buy a ticket, you stand a chance. Randomly. So in some of the studies that we've done, for example, which can be tedious anyway, you write down, like in this group, we are here. If we said we need 40 participants, or maybe not 40, let's say 25 to attend or to receive whatever. So each one of us gets a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to how many of us are here? Okay. And then put in a bag without looking, like a raffle draw, and select 53 or say 25. Whoever is there gets a chance. Simple and straightforward. Okay. The good thing is that everyone has a chance. There's no bias. But then, of course, there are issues. Okay. In that, as an example here, chances are that maybe the thing that you're investigating is not that very common. All right. A very small section or fraction of having. You might end up with 1 out of the 25, but it's a small disadvantage. Okay. Otherwise, another method, some say, oh, okay, line up. All right. Every third person, we start counting. Every third person, step left, and that's it. Intervals. Okay. Like in this case, says every 5th or 10th individual, etc. You choose people, or you choose production sites to visit, like that. But then, obviously, there are issues there. You're talking about sugar producers of different sizes. Others are just starting, very small capacity. There are those that are well established. Of course, you might chance have a representative sample using that method. All right. But as an example given here, says, what if it was 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, for example? The way people are already arranged, or the organizations or the producers already arranged, means that every second is of this characteristic, which is very hypothetical anyway. Okay, but it is a criticism that is leveled against that method. But how to do it? Fairly simple, straightforward. Okay. Every third or fourth. Then the next one, slide 16, stratified sampling. You know, English is not our mother tongue anyway. Sometimes these words like, wow, what do you mean stratified? Well, take a dictionary, go online. What does it mean stratified? Layer, strata. Okay. So it says here, if you have a reason to expect that there are differences, okay, in the issue that you're trying to measure, okay, between various individuals, various producers, maybe by size, then what you want to do is to separate them into their respective sizes or groups. I give here an example of large scale enterprise, medium scale, small scale, micro. I mean, if you did a random sampling of these sector, for example, industry, with different sizes, obviously you get everybody, give everybody a chance. But you might end up overrepresenting the micro, and then you want to generalize about the situation in a country when you really covered mostly micro or maybe large. If you focus on the large and find out, maybe go out there, collect data on their situation, the challenges, etc., those challenges will not exactly be, may not necessarily be the same as the experiences, the challenges that micro enterprises or medium scale. Okay, so what you do is stratify, put them in layers, put them in strata. Obviously, I think statistical offices, bureau statistics, whatever, they do have these definitions, the definition of a large scale based on number of employees or other outputs, etc. Okay, then Once you do that, what proportion do they represent of the sector? The large, maybe 45% as an example. The others, 30, 20. So now you say, okay, the sum, these large represent 45%. So we take 45% of 53, 30% for the medium of 53, etc. All right. So once you have those percentages, obviously you end up with 53. You can do random sampling from that. Okay. The advantages are spelled out there, accuracy representatives of the result by reducing sampling. Because obviously now you have, the other example I was looking at another time was, so there was a study on WASH. I don't know whether you know WASH, water and sanitary hygiene and stuff like that. So somebody wanted to go out there and interview households, male and female. And then you say, okay, number one, should we really care whether we interview male, female? I mean, we can just do sampling, male, female. But somebody says, hey, guess what? It is mostly females that are involved in things like water, sanitation, and hygiene. So maybe let's try to say not just 50-50 chance, but maybe 75% purposely should be females. 25% males. Okay. But I say anyway, this is an interesting area that you want to sit down with people from maybe statistics research institutions to really go into detail on how to go about selecting or doing sampling. The other one is cluster sampling. As I said, understand the word. What is a cluster? A group of similar things or people proposition. I mean, if you put it in Kiswahili, it's a cluster sampling. And then what is cluster sampling in Kiswahili? If it was in local language, everybody would easily understand. In English, it's like, oh, what is it? So yeah, sometimes go to dictionary, online or otherwise. With this method, you put your subjects in their respective clusters. Once you do that, then randomly select a cluster or two or three. Everybody in there becomes a subject for study. But as we say, sometimes maybe you want to do a little bit of further a two-stage. So within that, randomly select individuals from the selected cluster, if you want to maybe target specific, not necessarily specific, but at least to have a little bit of positive bias study subjects. Okay. There are disadvantages. I think we can always read these things online. Okay. Data sources. Who are the key providers? I think we touched on that. So statistical offices, the owners of the data. Maybe, of course, you can get online publications. Sometimes there is a fee. If you want to look at, sorry to say, it's like maybe e-commerce or whatever, there are those websites that collect information data from different countries. They charge a fee for that. Production capacity, as we said, none. So we go to the field. Field mission. Field mission is a challenge, really, as we found out. Some protocols are there sometimes, not most of the times. Normally, like if you want to collect data, maybe country or maybe regional, normally you go to the district commissioner, tell them, maybe even give them a questionnaire and maybe later explain what you, I mean, it's their district. Even when you get to the village, for example, you have to go to the chief, introduce yourself and what you want to do, get permission. In this activity, we try to do the same, get the permission from the partner states. Letters were sent in November. December, no response. January, no response. February, no. Now, we don't know exactly why. We can only speculate. Okay. One of the things to speculate is that the issue at hand is very sensitive. Okay. Sensitive. Production capacity. So when you go out there, I mean, for various reasons, some countries maybe don't want to discuss production capacity, because if you do, then you go out and find out that actually they don't have capacity, enough capacity to produce this, but they're insisting on this level of protection or blocking others. Now, I repeat, this is speculation. All right. I'm not saying they told us that, but we ended up missing out on this opportunity to collect the data. Not that we didn't try, we tried. Of course, we tried to push, the ED was involved, speaking directly, but somehow things. So things like this can happen, right? Then there are issues to do with the information ownership, protection issues, etc. There are rules, intellectual property rights. Even if you have the permission, when you go out there, some producers, maybe for one reason or another, sharing production capacity is like sharing trade secrets or something like that, for one reason or another. If you assure them that it will be used for this purpose, confidentiality issues, etc., you follow the laid out rules on how to handle, process, publish, etc. the data. Those are things that you should. And obviously, choice of data source has resource implications. We added a point, say, ensure accuracy and fairness. Obviously, accuracy is very important. You cannot afford to misrepresent the situation, misrepresent producers or whoever, subjects you're studying. Okay. Next is recruitment and training. So you see, this is all in the pipeline, planning to do this data collection. You've done the homework, etc. Up to a point now, you're saying, okay, field mission, we need these letters, we've gotten all these assurances, or maybe we protect data information in this way. Then you go and think about budgeting, data collection. Who do you get involved with? Do you want to be involved in this work? Okay, lead, principal researcher, supervisor, assistants, data manager. Okay, quickly on to the next one. Developing data collection instruments. For me, this is really an interesting area, and you can say simple, straightforward, but for me, it is really a question of how imaginative, how inquisitive you are. I mean, like a journalist, I think, as I mentioned at the time, if you want to do a good job, be sharp. Know the issue, the policy issues, we say, but then also be creative in how you ask the questions. Obviously, if you cast your net wide thinking, broadly, and then you expect whatever, people will give you broad answers. But if you are focused, direct to the issue, you get the answer. But sometimes you can miss out on important information, depending on the way you ask the question. Okay, we have examples, I think, coming up here in the questionnaire. All right, so it says, the question that I ask should directly lead you to the data that will help you answer the research. That is very important. But how to do that is really something that sometimes maybe you cannot teach people, but you can tell them. Say you want to, I don't know, sometimes proposition, somebody's difficult, etc. You try this way, you try that way. There's a point on triangulation. So triangulation is basically saying, okay, I ask you a question, you give me an answer, and I'm like, is this really true? So it could be, the problem is with me, I've asked you a question, you've answered it the way I've asked it, but maybe it's because of the way I've asked it. So you try to come from another angle. But sometimes it's because maybe this project manager is really playing up, playing the numbers. We did some evaluations out there of NGOs, and obviously they know they're not performing well, so therefore they cook stories or paint a picture. And then you say, okay, you said A, B, C, D, all right, everything like that. But what about this one? How did this happen if you had these things? And then they start revising the answers they gave you earlier, all right? I mean, obviously you're kind of like mistrusting, not trusting people, but it's your job to make sure that the numbers, that's why like in the court of law, I think we have lawyers here. When you ask questions, you don't just ask one and then stop there. From different angles, okay? Triangulation. And then of course you should also ask questions on the context, background, for you to understand what production capacity is there, etc. There are a number of things that you should understand about that. Okay. Moving on to the sugar example. Okay. So on this one, starting with the rationale for the sugar production capacity exercise or data collection exercise. Well, up there, we say doubts about production capacity. I think something that I already explained. Duty-free treatment or preferential treatment being denied because the other partner states doesn't believe that the exporting partner has production capacity. And then, of course, there was the other issue of policies on CET, common external tariff, being perhaps made, like not as the ED put it, evidence-based. Okay, so hence, so I'm just going over the kind of thinking that went on when we were working on the data collection instruments for sugar production capacity. We asked the question, what area efforts have been made to undertake or resolve the issue? We shared with the EABC that actually they are on the spot verification missions by customs officials and technical personnel. Now, technical personnel, that's a very important thing when you talk about production capacity. You go out there, sugar, and you ask a question, oh, what's your production capacity, installed capacity? Let's say 100,000 metric tons. All right, what does it mean to you? All right, sometimes maybe it's a complex production, like sausage. I mean, looks easy, but you sit there and say, hey, tell me the process. So you need to involve, if it was possible, involve people with that technical expertise on what goes on there, the complexity. If EABC goes out there, maybe just EABC stuff, obviously maybe you use officials, or like in this case, members of the associations in manufacturing, for example, that are already there. They have the knowledge. They can tell, all right, the production flow, the production process. Okay, what data, production capacity, how will it be done? Said, oh, why don't we just maybe use ISO, International Sugar Organization? They don't have the data. Why can't we just mail the questionnaire? We can do that. But the ESC partner states themselves don't do that. Now, if we do that, and then we take the data to ESC partners and say, hey, look, we've got this data on production capacity. Ask, how did you do it? We mail the questionnaire. How do you believe what somebody told you without you being there to verify on the spot? So the option was to go to the field. Okay. Use of data, etc. I think for policy or advocacy. On the next,
Prof, I think you are bringing an important point there, and I think you are very right. One, especially on the sugar production capacity, I've been I engaged the Sugar Association in Tanzania, and currently they are telling me they are producing
450,000 metric tons. And when you look at the market trend and market consumption, generally you would say they have a surplus in terms of production. And I always wonder why, if we have a surplus within the region, why do we have to import? Why do we have to import sugar? So I think maybe in my view, my recommendation, we need, in this data collection training, we need also to ablaze ourselves with consumption data also. Then there it helps us in engaging and informing the policymaker now that we need now to protect our sugar producers within EAC, because now we have sufficient capacity to meet the demand. And I think that's where we need this information. This is very, very important, especially with our national focal point here. We need to be abreast with this real-time data to engage, as we even engage, provide input to the budget. We should be able to inform our policymaker that this is what the region is able to produce. Not only sugar as a product, but also other product where we have sufficient production capacity. So I think that is the trend, that is the rationale of this exercise, and I'm happy I'll take it further with you. Also, in terms of having a kind of a training in terms of how do we also track the consumption data. What are we? Yes, we are producing, but for whom? How do we track that? Who is consuming? What is our consumption data? What is our consumption trend? So I think that is something we need to take further with you, Prof. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you, Edie. Yes, what you're saying is very important. And this is on the issue that we said earlier, that you can't just ask about production capacity and stop there. But there are other important information, be it contextual, be it for background, that you need to have at hand to support, to validate, to tell a story that this is the situation. Now, consumption, the questions on consumption are also in the questionnaire that we're about to look at, all right? Because we felt that we can't just ask about production level and installed capacity without knowing how much is imported, how much is consumed, right? If somebody says, I have 400,000 metric tons, and then maybe within the country, consumption is, let's say, 500, but they are still able to export. How are you able to export if you're exhausting or all of it is consumed locally? All right. So yeah, this is, I think, one of the issues that we raised in the questionnaire that we're about to look at on slide number 20. Okay. So on slide number 20 onwards, really, this is what we set out, or we were going to go out there, meet producers of sugar, ask a few questions. The first page is really about, tell us about who you are, about the producer, okay? The names of the respondents, the specific geographic location, etc. All right. And then we also try to look at the issue of gender. Do we have male, female representations in the respondents? All right. On the next one is the kind of like introduction, introductory words or things to say to the producers. Now, normally it's good practice to have this prepared for people who are going to collect the data so that there is uniformity in the information that you convey. If you simply say, here's a questionnaire, trade ABCD, and then the first page is maybe, of course, specifics about who is the respondent, etc. Then you go straight into how I read out, how I explain my own way is going to be different from how others do it. But we try to say, okay, everybody going out there, they will ask obviously for permission to read out. The EABC, all right, and the EACC Secretariat based in here are collaborating to do A, B, C, D. The purpose is this and that. All right, so that the respondent is very clear. The same message is read out in TZ, URT, Kenya, etc. And then the questions that follow, obviously. So this is very important. When you plan to do the data collection, always do this thing that you want to be heard out there by respondents. And of course, we have contact numbers, details of the people in case the respondent wants to get more information, for permission to say, hey, some of the information or maybe pictures, etc., if you allow us, will be put on. If they object to that, we accept that. You don't take pictures and you don't. All right. Because obviously there is something on, this is funded by the EU, therefore the EU law on general data protection regulation comes into play. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that this is very important that you need to cover. The first part of the questions really is the profile of the company and the number of factories. So again, this is really context. You can't just go there, what is production capacity in there? No, let's know who you are. How many factories do you have? If somebody says, I have 400,000 metric tons, one factory, obviously we'll be interested to look at the factory, look at the premises, all right? When they started, etc. And then you find that maybe it's just tiny. Maybe if it doesn't even exist in real sense, then you have issues. Because that information you're collecting here, when somebody tells you later that I have so much capacity, this information becomes valuable. But we saw that, or maybe the geographic position, there's nothing there. Okay. In which year did each of the factories, assuming maybe this company has 2, 3, 4 factories. That's why you have separate columns like that. Okay. Now, this is imagination on our part as a team, as we were setting out to go out there and collect data. Okay. Which sugar factories are still in operation and this time of the study? Because some people, depending on the way they have understood the question, or maybe for other reasons, will report we have 6 or 4 factories. In actual sense, maybe just 1. They'll be telling you about production capacity of 5 or so, when in actual sense, there's just 1 operating. Okay. So these are background contextual questions that we need to ask. When you go out there and look at other sectors or other products, you also try to do that. You will have time to go through this PowerPoint, I suppose, maybe the questionnaire. All right. So now, because we haven't got time left, we'll just quickly go through that. The second part, if this was sugar production, please understand how sugar is produced. Okay. They'll probably have a production flow process or diagrams. Sit down with them. Let them explain to you how it is done. While you're reading that, observe points where inputs come in, where materials that are sourced locally come in, where at what point output is taken. Okay, so in CO3, explain to me the process. Be kind of questioners. They will be happy to, they will happily explain to you, unless they're in a hurry. Okay, the process of producing, beginning with raw sugar cane to the final stage. Once you have that information, of course, the questionnaire has already got set questions, but when you're having further discussions, you can take notes on other things. Maybe the questionnaire missed out some important things. That's the whole point of saying, please explain to me the process. Okay, now we want to look at production capacity. Now, production capacity, we agreed as a team to say that we should define it as installed capacity. Okay, installed capacity. 5 big machines that can churn out or maybe process whatever, that capacity. Okay. Then you look at the question, okay, for how long have you had it? How about in the future? What capacities are you talking about? Right. Slide number 25 continues with that. Expected sugar production. So there is the production capacity and then the actual production. Those two are different things, all right? You can have capacity to produce 300,000, but you're actually producing 50,000, all right? Of course, it's one thing to go out there and say, Kenya has 300,000 capacity. In actual sense, Kenya is producing 50,000, all right? And then Kenya is exporting, having consumed all of it, is exporting 25,000. Now, if you simply sat there and say, okay, production capacity is 300,000, and therefore anything coming from Kenya under 300,000 is Kenyan origin, you're wrong. And that's why these other questions are important. It's not just about asking production capacity, but also about these other things. How much are you actually producing? Okay. So the question here is production capacity, but remember these important questions. Okay. In terms of inputs, we're starting with employment or employees, how many, it is important. ICR, gender issues, very important, but it shouldn't just be ICR, all of us, all right? So we obviously we're going to collect data on skilled workers, how many are permanent, unskilled, by gender, obviously, seasonal, because there's seasonality, all right? All these would have given us a picture as to what is happening there for us to comment on production capacity. Then you can take it to policymakers. Having this full knowledge of the sector, policy, of course, obviously at the back of everything. I mean, at the back of your mind. Okay. Inputs, how much from local sources? Okay. How much maybe from other producers or maybe the company itself? Sugar imports. Did you import any? Now that's an interesting point that you can ask the producers whether they imported sugar or not. But what if a trader somewhere is importing sugar? Now, I'll tell you this. We weren't going to limit ourselves to talking to sugar producers. We were going to go to statistical offices to look at imports of sugar, to customs, look at imports of sugar. Then with the information from the producers, put it together, then we have a picture as to the supply of sugar into this country, and then what it is exporting to get a complete picture. Again, that's the point I said, that you can't just focus on one question, what is sugar production, I mean, your production capacity. So the issue or information on inputs is very important. Comments from the Secretariat, EAC Secretariat advised us that we should differentiate between beet or raw sugar and sugar for industrial use, which we're happy to do that. And you see the questions there basically differentiating, asking how many tons were imported outside this, you know, how many of these did the company import, etc. Sources. Okay. And then the distribution. Okay. Distribution basically meaning how much was sold locally, domestic consumption, and how much was exported outside this country. Okay. Please indicate the quantities sugar, for industries at this country that were sold within this country, sold in other states, and the rest of the world. Now, we have a little bit of information on consumption here. But just like with imports, we were going to get some data from the International Sugar Organization that has very good information on consumption by country, all right, and by type of sugar. All right. I think the last but one is basically on exports. You know, having produced this and that, it says, please indicate the quantities of sugar produced at this factory that were sold within SCATE, sold in other EAC partner states and the rest of the world. Okay. So that's on distribution of sugar produced, domestic use and exports. Okay. That's the questionnaire. But as I said, I told you, I said there, although we have these specific questions, there are other data that we're going to collect from other sources. Obviously, we wouldn't ask those kind of questions to these producers if we know we can get that information more reliable, maybe reliable information from other sources. Okay. On the next, which is the slide number 31, we thought maybe we might have a bit of time because it's not good to just listen from one source, but also listen from the practitioners, okay, our participants, testimonies. Now, even if we don't have time for this now, it will still be useful, interesting, really, if maybe you can share your experiences with the EABC, all right? And then if there's time or opportunity to work together on these things are things that, because this is supposed to be hands-on. It's one thing to listen, sit down, listen in a classroom situation, maybe like this. It's another thing to say, okay, here we go. Planning. Okay, from experience, supervising research work, etc. I tell you, there's a big difference. Of course, you've all been through, you know, education, universities, etc. You know how it is challenging to come up with a research proposal. But I really thought maybe there would be an opportunity to hear. So EABC, I think maybe from this point onwards, you can help us really, if at all there are some volunteers, one or two persons, if they can share with us their experiences on these particular things, or one or two things, that would be useful. But otherwise, still, individuals can send in their situations or testimonies to the EABC office, and then if there are opportunities, we can sit down and review these things to take this to another level. On 32, that's me, Evius. Thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Mr. Moderator.
Yes, thank you, Professor, for that very useful presentation. Now our time is fast spent because we had planned this up to noon, and now it is 3 minutes past noon. So maybe if we can open up the room for questions, if anybody has questions, but also we urge our participants, as we will be sharing these slides to you on that last part, which has some key areas where we think maybe data should be collected as participants. You can do for us, for example, in this particular training, we had invited umbrella associations. So we'll ask these key sector-specific associations and umbrella associations if they have any areas they think they can identify, so that going forward we can have something to work with. But for now, let me open the room for questions, maybe for the next 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll wind up our training today. So welcome everyone, if someone has a question. Okay, so maybe while people are thinking what to ask, I had a small question, Professor, on the tool that you had shown of regarding data. I mean sampling. So is this something we can access online? Is it a tool that is accessible to anyone online, or someone has to sign in, have an account? How does it look like to access this tool? Maybe if I can project it here on the slides. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, I remember. That one is free of charge. I mean, the sample size, okay, it's an open thing. You don't have to pay. If it was for other things like International Sugar Organization, for example, all right, there are charges. But for this one, that one is free. Even if you go online right now, you'll be able to punch in any numbers. If your population size, the size of the sector or industry is, let's say, milk producers, right? Let's say 20,000 or 15,000, you can easily plug and play around with those numbers, highlighting the question marks, and then you get a feel of what it is. Otherwise, I was going to give you an equation, all right? But an equation, I think in this day and age, may not be, of course, you need to have that kind of theoretical, thing, but when you have a calculator set out like this, maybe there is another one somewhere online, then please use it, right? There's a very clear statistical theory behind it, so you can always get it. This is just an example. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So if there are no any further questions, maybe we can begin winding up our presentation for today. So again, I want to urge our participants, we will be sharing this presentation with you. And we ask you once more to consider the last part of the presentation where we want to identify the areas for data collection, because we think it is really important. As the presenter was saying, we are going into these discussions for budget presentations in our nations. We are going into other different time of the year where policies have to be made at the EAC Secretariat level. So it's very important to have adequate and reliable information. So we rely on you for developing, but also to collect this information so that we can push our agenda forward. So with that, let me just call in our ED, Mr. John Bosco Kalisa, if you have any closing remarks before we wind up our meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Allow me to thank our consultant and the professor who has ably took us through this training. It was a very exciting training, and I think everyone who participated can ably confirm that this is very useful as we try to build a very strong database in our region. We need this type of training in terms of data collection, especially for the value chain. These are the value chain that we believe as EABC we have both comparative and competitive advantage. But we have not been able to come up with a strong evidence to engage our policymakers that we need to protect, safeguard these sectors, the leather-related products, textile, sugar. These are critical value chain. They provide employment, they provide revenue to our government, they contribute to our economic growth and prosperity for our region. So as EABC, as our national focal point, really we need to engage, we need to dive deeper in understanding the production data and the production capacity of our members, and we need to dive deeper into sectoral composition. As again, this region has been flooded with imports for the goods that we should be producing for ourselves, and that has a very negative knock-on effect in our consumption, in our growth, in our welfare, we need to work on this. We need to work on this, and I really, as EABC, we are very committed to take this further and to have continuous and frequent training in terms of data collection, so that wherever we are engaging into a policy dialogue, we are informed with real data, with accurate data in terms of our advocacy agenda. So I want again to thank Stefan, to thank Avias and the team for excellent work, to thank DAFA, GIFT, who have been behind this exercise. And again, my commitment that we need to drive this forward. We need to drive this forward with even other sector, not only sugar alone, because sugar was just an illustration, an example, but we believe we can do other sectors where we have a comparative advantage. So thank you everyone. Thank you all our participants for excellent contribution and insight. And this again brings us to the next level, where we are going to engage our partner in terms of moving or forging the way forward. Thank you very much, and I want to wish you a very great afternoon.
Thank you, Edie. But before everyone leaves, I would like to ask you to turn on your cameras so that we can take a photo. Because I remember we had said this in the beginning, that we'll be having a photo session. So please, if you can take a minute to turn on your cameras, and we'll be taking a group photo.
And Prof, please put on your camera. I see Leonard Juma. Well done for the question you raised. I see Muyuku, Mulema. I hope my team are capturing well, the com team.
Yes, let me ask Gift or is it Julie, if they're online, they can take the picture and
yes,
confirm if they have taken the.
Nafa, sorry, give me 5 minutes.
No, okay, the right, huh? So the right is okay. I think it's clear now.
So Julie, are we ready? Or?
Yeah.
Yes, Nafa.
Julia is trying to.
I think his network is a bit weak, so.
I put it on, okay. I'm told a minute, Frank. Done. Thank you very much. I'm told it's done.
Okay. So thank you everyone for attending. We'll be reaching out to you on your emails, and hopefully we'll get a response from you on those key areas for data collection. So thank you once again. I see my friend Safari here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Asanteni sana.
Thank you all and have a lovely day there. So signing out. Good night. Oh, good day to you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Avias.